All righty. There we go. That's what I was waiting on. Awesome. Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. I'm so excited to be here today to share in a great conversation with some esteemed leaders throughout the market. So I first want to take a moment to just share a couple of announcements. First being, I just want to say thank you to our annual sponsors whose support really supports us all the way throughout the year. I also want to thank the Education Committee, co-chairs Cheryl and Kelly, as well as the committee members who work so hard to put this conversation together. Teresa Terry, Dan Dooley, and Henry White, thank you so much for your leadership in providing such a great conversation for us to get our Wednesday started. So today we have an interesting conversation on leading in the new world of work. And we have a great panel that's going to share their perspectives and highlights throughout their work and inspirations. So I just want to make a quick note. If you have questions, please submit your questions for the Q&A in the chat, and the panel will answer at the end of the program. I also just wanted to note, just as a quick reminder, to please mute your mics and silence your cameras, so that way we don't have any distractions throughout the program. So first, why don't I introduce our moderator, Mark Watkins, Senior Director of Global Real Estate at Thermo Fisher. And then Mark, I'll let you take it away and introduce the rest of the group. So Mark is a corporate professional with 25 years of global real estate, facilities, life sciences, finance, and hospitality experience. He currently, with Thermo Fisher, leads a complex portfolio of about 40 million square feet of diverse space across 50 countries, and managing projects of up to 100 million square feet of manufacturing, lab, logistics, and clinics and office space. He's got a lot of experience in M&A, site searches, consolidations, dispositions, food service, workplace strategy, you name it, Mark has the expertise. And he also has a special passion for things around equity, diversity, and inclusion. He's a champion of continuous improvement, focused on delivering value, creating places people want to work, and also having the design principles that foster a strong sense of belonging. And he creates value by leading with values. I could not think of a better candidate to lead this conversation. So I'd like to hand it over to you, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan, and good morning, everybody. I'm thrilled to be joining you all today. So thank you very much. I appreciate you having me here. As Megan said, I'm very involved with DEI, with the New England chapter, and connecting with other chapters for CoreNet Global. So this is very apropos. We have got a fantastic panel today to discuss leading in the new world of work, which is very relevant and a discussion that many of us are having. It's certainly challenging, and for those of you that attended the summit, you probably heard this theme throughout the few days that we were in Chicago. I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel and then get right into asking some questions and getting some dialogue going. So Jessica Bantom is a diversity, equity, inclusive, and belonging practitioner and workplace expert. She is the author of Design for Identity, How to Design Authentically for a Diverse World, which is coming out in the spring of 2023. She is a skilled management consultant with over 2 decades of experience and a certified facilitator and coach. She's focused on DEIB and becoming more culturally competent and thriving in our increasingly global world. James Bailey is professor and Hochberg Fellow of Leadership Development at George Washington University School of Business and a fellow in the Center for Management Development, London Business School. He is also taught at the University of Michigan, NYU, IMD, Helsinki School of Economics. He was named one of the world's top 10 executive educators by the International Council for Executive Leadership Development and has published over 50 academic papers and case studies and has authored 5 books. He's worked with companies like Nestle, UBS, ConocoPhillips, and Goldman Sachs. He has served as a dean, department chair, and program director during his 30-year academic career. So with that said, I'd like to get the discussion going. And looking forward to making this as interactive as possible. So hopefully we'll be getting some questions in the chat. But to get started off, I'm going to start off with you, Jess. Can you share your thoughts on how to be a DEI leader in a virtual environment?
Thank you, Mark. That's a great question, and good morning, everybody. Well, there's a lot about being a DEI leader in a virtual environment is similar to being a DEI leader in an in-person environment. There are still the same skill sets, the same priorities actually still apply. I believe that in the virtual environment, however, there's an added layer in that we have to be more intentional about our activities, especially to be inclusive. Because we are not in the same physical space, we have to be extra deliberate in the limited virtual time that we spend together. Deliberate about making space for communication, for interaction, deliberately making space for dialogue that may have just casually happened in the in-person spaces. But just generally, the work is still the same. Our culture is still our culture, regardless of whether we are in person or virtual. And I say that because our culture is essentially about our behaviors and norms and what we accept as standard practices and behaviors and ways to show up for each other. And that conveys into a virtual environment as well. And it's interesting, you mentioned being a DEI leader in a virtual environment. This is a time that requires everybody in a way to be a DEI leader. DEI is not just about, there is a certain subject matter expertise, but the concept of being an inclusive leader is one that all of us can take up. That's a mantle that everybody as individuals can take up, whether your title is a leader or not. And the importance of that is making that commitment as individuals to live and embody and demonstrate the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, no matter where we are.
And how do you make up for not having those casual collisions that you have when you're in the office? Do you have any tricks on how we can remain as engaged as possible with the teams?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of practices that were actually becoming more standard pre-pandemic, before we were all necessarily forced more into a more virtual world, I will say. And some of that was around practices like one-on-one check-ins. That's also feeding into this concept about more continuous feedback loops as opposed to like an annual assessment or just checking in once or twice a year with your staff and with your colleagues. So that's definitely a practice, just intentionally making time to check in. And when I say check in, it's not just a status update. It's making space for a conversation. Maybe half the time is about what work are you doing? And the other time is about what's happening with you as a person. It was interesting to me to see how that became more of a dialogue, especially during the pandemic, during the shutdown, when we were all feeling so off kilter. And that became more of a conversation because we were having a shared experience of just something completely abnormal. But we can't lose that because there were a lot of important connections made by adopting those behaviors and by engaging in those conversations that I think remain critical because we're still human beings having human experiences who just happen to work together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have any guidelines on how often you think those one-on-one conversations should be happening?
I've seen some there are a lot more performance management systems and things like that in place now that actually reinforce this kind of behavior. A lot of them are set up for maybe weekly check-ins. I have seen managers, even in my own organization, who have added that to their schedules. They have gone out of their way to carve that space to allow for that kind of interaction. And I think it's also, in addition to doing that, I think it's also important to create space for larger conversation, maybe at the team level, maybe at a division level, and maybe even, organization wide, to once again check in to see how people are doing and what they need to feel supported so that they can do the work. All of us show up to work to do the work. We don't come to work to to navigate feelings of being excluded. We don't come to work to be on pins and needles because we're waiting for that coworker who everybody knows speaks out of turn to, do another microaggression. We all we're there to do what we do. And the more that leaders can make space and put the practices in place to make that happen, the better off we'll all be.
Yeah, very well said. If you have employees that are on pins and needles, that anxiety that they're going through will resonate, will be contagious, will show, and that does not lead to a productive environment. For those of you that were in Seattle for the summit, Howard Behar from Seattle, from Starbucks spoke, and he talked about how critical it is to make time for your employees and checking in. And as a leader, I think that we want to be able to not only trust, but trust the judgment of our teams and the decisions that they are making, empowering them. But you've got to have that trust for the judgment that they're making. And that's difficult, especially when you're virtual. So James, over to you. Can you discuss the complexities in the resulting research from a leadership perspective in a virtual environment?
Yeah, it's the timing of this program is really quite amazing, because at 2:00 this morning, I submitted a paper on can the remote work world advance DEI initiatives, the case of culture. And so Jessica brought up culture, and that I think is a theme that all of us have in our organizations. And so I'm actually going to play a little bit of a devil's advocate, not just for the heck of it, but because I actually believe something very different than what Jessica put forward. That's why they've asked us both here to be columnists, is that we have opposing viewpoints on this, is that, we all know that there's a moral case and a business case for DEI. Okay, that has been established very, very, very cleanly, very clearly. The research is terrific around that. However, all DEI initiatives are premised on having a proper organizational culture in place. Now, what's organizational culture? A collection of values, expectations, practices that guide and inform the actions of all team members. Great culture exemplifies positive qualities that lead to improved performance, while dysfunctional cultures can hinder performance. Okay, we know that good organizational cultures, organizations with good cultures, perform better than those that don't. For example, they're 50% more likely to experience double-digit revenue growth over a 3-year period. They're 2.5 times more likely to experience significant stock growth over that same period. So we know that culture is incredibly important, right? We've known this for years and years. We've been saying that culture is a key competency of organizations. So one of the differences between cultures or organizations is the strength of and the direction of their cultures. And so we know that that's been around for an awful long time. We know that when employees looking at jobs, that they consider the culture of the organization. We know that good organizational cultures reduce turnover in organizations. So we know, excuse me, all of these terrific things about organizational culture, but we don't know whether or not culture can be built remotely. Right? And that's a question that I don't think anybody can answer. that there is just simply not enough research for that. See, cultures require this sort of setting of standardized or shared norms and expectations. And those norms and expectations include things like routines, they include your conduct toward one another, they include things like punctuality, some things just as absolute basic as that. And we just simply don't have the data to suggest that organizational culture can be performed remotely. A recent survey showed that 700 remote workers found that the primary thing that they missed in their aspect of remote work life were close human contacts and face-to-face meetings. That's what people are saying that they miss most. Now, let's take all this to DEI. Okay? Gallup said that very straight that remote work was a threat to DEI initiatives, that the culture that was necessary to build DEI initiatives around the belief systems that are required for that, the individual commitment that's required to, the informal interaction that's required is threatened by remote work. And the Society of Resource Management asserted that it would be extraordinarily challenging to build DEI cultures in a remote fashion. And so I think that's where I'm at here, is that there's a lot of talk out there about all the things we can do remotely, and they're the same as we can do face to face. And to be frank, I just don't buy it.
Fair enough. What about hybrid versus being full-time in the office? We see a lot of companies that are allowing a hybrid work environment.
We've been working that way, Mark, for 25 years. Okay, there's nothing new about hybrid work. It just got accelerated in a major way. It got accelerated, but especially us academics know about hybrid work. We go into our office 3 days a week. And other than that, we were on Zoom, we were on all these technologies way before anybody else was, because we're working with colleagues in Singapore and in Beijing and in Myanmar and in Brussels and so forth. So we've been moving this way for a long time. Organizations have been giving people 1 day a week to work at home. They've been moving to 4-day, 40-hour work weeks. And so this has been coming along for a while. It just got accelerated. Now, if you do move to hybrid, now you've got questions like, well, how much and who? Okay, so some people can work at home every day. They would never need to go in. Other people have to be there every day. So now we start sacrificing the E and DEI. And that some people have to come in 5 days a week, and some people can only come in 2 days a week. And so that's sacrificing one of the biggest elements of this initiative is equality. Now it's not going to be equal for people. And so, boy, when you're working toward these remote models, you've got to think about the equity across the organization. I'm working with a law firm right now that is thinking about bringing in like intellectual property lawyers on Tuesdays and Thursdays, real estate and tax people on Mondays and Wednesdays and so forth and so on. But you know what? The legal administrative staff has to come in every day. So
It's tough.
I don't know what I'd feel about that. I don't know what I'd feel if I had to come in every day. And I have, by the way, I might have an MBA. I don't have a law degree, but I might have an MBA, and I got to come in every day. And these guys only have to come in twice a week.
Well, you have empathy.
Those are going to be really, really difficult to manage fairly.
Yeah, I agree with that. We have a similar situation with Thermo Fisher, with our manufacturing sites, with our warehouses. There's a lot of people that will say that your culture is even more important than your strategy. You can't build a strategy with a poor culture. I was in a young leaders program yesterday. They did a end of program presentation, and it focused on culture. And they surveyed the audience, which was probably close to 100. And not surprisingly, the question revolved around, with a poor culture, would you stay with the company? And nearly 100% of attendees said no, we would leave. So culture is clearly really important. If you're going to be a good leader, you need to be aligned with that culture, building that culture, and making sure that the team is also fully aligned. It's that critical. So leadership has to give the direction on creating the company culture. and make decisions on how to create a positive work environment, a hybrid work environment that is supporting your culture. And what are you seeing successful leaders do to foster that type of environment? Do either one of you have any thoughts on what a good leader is doing? It's tough because this is evolving. We don't have a lot of data. But if there are any specific leaders, qualities that you've seen that have worked especially well, I'd love to hear about it.
Well, I would like to say that I think that there are just general qualities that some standout leaders exemplify, without speaking to one particular example, that are necessary to promote a positive culture. And I would say that one of those is being open-minded to the fact and the ways that culture is changing. And also to be aware of the fact that there is the culture that they intend, and then there is the culture that people experience day to day. And there is often a disconnect. I think a lot of leaders have great intentions. Especially, I've worked in a couple of startups and I know those leaders personally. And I know in those cases, they intentionally created their own organization because they wanted to be different than everybody else. They had come from these large organizations, these large global organizations where they felt the people got lost in the mix and they wanted to create something different. Have all the intentions in the world, but the second you add in more people, your culture constantly shifts. And I think in a lot of instances, the leaders don't have visibility into what the day-to-day experience is of their employees. To the employees, that is the culture. It's not the words on the website. It's not a DEI statement that you made in the summer of 2020. It is what I experience every day. So I think the leaders who are willing to get beyond the vision they've created to actually dive into and to inquire about what the experience is to be a part of their organization, those are the leaders who are going to move the mark. Those are the leaders who can model the behaviors that align with their vision of what they want that space and that organization at that place to be, and how they want that organization to show up for their employees, but also externally to the world. And they want to have that integrity and that consistency internally as well as externally. They want to be the good employer. They want to be the good workplace. They want to be the good global citizen. And I think that those leaders who are, as I said, willing to, bring in the DEI consultants. I've done DEI assessments for organizations where leaders said they wanted to see, they thought, once again, they had a vision of what's happening in their organization, but when they see the results of the assessment, they don't like it. And all of a sudden, the DEI consultant didn't do a good job, or they came in with a mission, or, they were looking to tear us down. To me, that humble servant leader will take that input and say, okay, what can we do? What can we do to make the experience of our employees better? What can we do to act and show up in meaningful ways that will make this place a place where people want to be and where they can do what they're here to do without concern about covering up any element of their identity or being punished for any element of their identity.
So you think that they need to be thoughtful, they need some good change management, they need to listen. It's not going to happen overnight. You can't just flip the switch and convert. But there are people and leaders that think that. We see what's happening, for example, with Twitter. That's overnight they're being told they've got to come back to the facilities. So James, do you have thoughts on what a successful leader can do to drive the culture and lead a successful culture with a hybrid work environment?
Yes and no, and I think everything Jessica said is correct, and I'm going to boil it down a little bit, and this actually comes from a paper I published earlier this year, is that we went to 1,500 different executives, 17 different companies, and we asked them a very simple question. think back in your life to someone who's made a profound difference in your life that helped make you become who you are. Think of a story that encapsulate that person's impact. Write the story down. And then we did all sorts of different analysis of those stories. And what it comes down to is 85% of those stories were how a leader made you feel. That leadership is, in the final analysis, an emotional relationship. That's what we remember. We don't remember the things that he or
Yeah,
she.
they don't forget. They do not forget.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We don't remember the technical stuff, but we remember that they made us feel competent, confident, capable, collaborative, and they make us feel included. And so my concern is, how do you make somebody feel included in a remote environment? Other than asking them questions, which I can do at home. I mean, excuse me, at the office. I can do that at the office, and that doesn't make anybody feel included. I've been an instructor for 30 years now. I can look to a student and say, you know, hey, George, what do you think about this? It doesn't make him feel included. A lot of times that makes him feel embarrassed. I'm just not quite sure how you get to that point of the feeling, the emotion of leadership, because it is an emotional relationship in a remote setting, because it's difficult to do as it is face to face.
And
Yeah, you need
actually,
to
I want
put
to
a
speak
lot
to
of
that
thought
point
and
too.
effort into it.
Yeah, sorry, Mark. I just wanted to speak to that point too. It isn't just about asking a question, just like you said, James. It's about what you do with the answer. It's about how are you valuing what you're receiving? Right. And also what environment are you creating where, if you ask the question, people feel like it's worth it to answer. It's worth it to engage, that what I say is going to be respected and valued, and that if you're asking me for input, that you're actually going to apply it. So there's a lot of dynamics to that. Just like you said, it's never just about asking a question. It is about what you do with responses and how you create a space where, just like you said, you could ask somebody a question all day. If they don't feel like you really care about what their response is, it doesn't matter.
Bingo. I'm going to move on. We're hearing that there's reduced productivity, especially here in the United States. It's going downwards. This is after years of hearing it's actually increasing with remote or hybrid work environment. Do you think that the hybrid work environment is playing into that? And if you do, how can you use the hybrid model to help enhance productivity? At the end of the day, I can tell you that my boss cares about productivity. He cares about the numbers. So I'd be interested to hear from both of you on your thoughts of it is impacted by hybrid work, and if so, what we can do.
Want me to go first, Jessica?
Oh, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right. We're seeing that decrease. We also, by the way, see that hybrid workers are 27% more likely to change jobs. And that has an impact on productivity of an organization as well. But that's a little bit more at a macro level. And of course, that's they have that ability to do right now, but we're going to see the supply-demand relationship, professional service workers change real quick, as Meta and others have shown us what's going to happen in that world as technology companies downsize in general. So part of this is a boomerang effect. Okay? Is that for a long time, what organizations were looking for with your performance at work was whether you delivered what we call minimally acceptable standards. So if I could write out a list, A, B, C, D, E, and you're supposed to do those things, well, you got them done. There's no question about that. You got those things done at work. But what we're now starting to realize is that all these informal aspects of work that are critically important, for example, the formation of culture, for example, making people feel included by not just listening to their answer, but responding in a meaningful and dignified way to their answer. All of those little things contribute to performance, and they're not there now. And so it's finally caught up that we're starting to see that there's delivering minimally acceptable standards just isn't enough. And so what we're expecting from a performance standpoint has then commensurately started to go down.
And I think there are a couple things at play here. One being that with the, the Great Resignation, there are a lot of people who left the workforce, so there were fewer people left behind to pick up the slack. I don't think we can neglect that. There is the fact that, and I think this is a challenge of being in hybrid environments, that, this goes back to the point I mentioned about intentionality, that maybe some managers just haven't made that shift or that pivot to think about, what do I need to do differently in this existence to make sure that I am supporting everybody in the right way to make sure they can be most productive. Now, of course, the onus is on us as individuals as well to figure out how to perform to a certain extent as well, and how we can perform optimally. But as leaders, I think that it can be more challenging to make that pivot to look at people as individuals and how they best perform. So there may be some people who literally, maybe they need more than the once a week check-in. Maybe you see that over time and seeing they are the people who literally in the office would have been the ones to say, all right, let's go whiteboard this out. And that's the way they think through things. That's the way they process it. That's the way they're the most productive. And you don't have that necessarily in a hybrid environment or in this virtual environment. So thinking about the ways that people have had to translate how they work best into this new way of being and interacting. So I think that just goes to the point of just being intentional and really thinking through the best ways to support people to show up and to do their work. And it's a lot of things. I think a lot of this requires thought that we just didn't have to. It wasn't necessary in a traditional environment where we were all face to face. We all had to show up, where eyes were literally on people every day. So it's just, I think we just need to expand our perspective of what's required to really be productive and for us all to contribute in meaningful ways.
I'd add to this. I think the party's over. I think working at home for everybody felt like it was a great party. And, oh, isn't this so great? I don't have to get up. I don't have to get dressed. I don't have to drive in the office. I don't have to deal with all those people. And I think that they're getting sick of it. I don't think in history, we've always separated home from work. Okay, you've been told your home life, don't bring that work stuff home with you. Leave work at work. And now home is work. And people have found that getting kind of confusing. And so I think it's having a second disruption. And that second disruption is having an attendant performance disruption as well.
Well, I think it's also impacting mental health. Bringing work home was common pre-COVID. That did happen. Going on vacation, it can be difficult to turn off. A good leader knows how to turn that off and let the team re-energize. But I do agree with you that, coming into the office, quote unquote, the party is over. It sounds like you may be speaking to some of the leaders with my company. In fact, I'm expecting a memo to come out today to the entire population saying it's either 4 or 5 days a week, you are going to be in the office. So we do have that mindset, and I happen to agree with it. And it is coming from leadership. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works. We will continue to have some roles which are hybrid, especially commercial roles, but that's been that way for a very, very long time. What does the person you are managing expect when you are in that virtual environment, especially when you have got a recent college graduate or somebody that is new to the workforce? How do you help them succeed when it is hybrid or virtual? Do you have any pointers there? I'm gonna start with you, Jessica.
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but there is some level of intentionality there. I think that leaders have to be more conscious of creating those opportunities and engaging with those newer staff. You have to think about all of the adjustments that they're making, going from a school environment to a professional setting, adapting to a new schedule, to new expectations, to new roles that they've never been in before. So there has to be that awareness that they are going to need more support. I think especially as we get more seasoned, some of us work more independently, that we get in that headspace of I get up, I know what I need to do. I have my agenda, I have my objectives, I know what my plan is. But putting ourselves in that space of that new employee who is now not only just new to the organization, but they are not physically connected to people. They're just not in that they don't have that common experience yet to kind of ground them and to give them guidance and direction. So I think it is a lot about setting expectations. It might be more about, we're going to talk about what your schedule should look like. We're going to talk about what your tasks are. And also, by the way, I'm here. I will make myself accessible to you in whatever ways make sense to make sure that you are feeling you're getting acclimated as much as possible. And I think that does need to be a two-way dialogue.
Yeah, you need to dig into it. And I don't know if that's the right term, but you really need to roll up your sleeves. Being a people manager is not easy. It requires a lot of thought. Every individual is very different. And I feel as though you do need to customize the approach that you're taking with each employee to help make a successful introduction to a new work environment. James, would be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, so a study recently showed that, back up here, there's three major groups in the workplace right now. There's millennials, Generation Xers, and baby boomers, about a third each one. And so a large scale survey asked them two questions. Basically, do you want to go back to the office? And second, do you think your performance was hindered by working at home? Baby boomers were kind of in the middle on both of those. We can say, well, maybe they're getting a little bit toward the end of their career. They're thinking about the next stage of their life. They're starting to kind of step away from their organizations. So something along those lines. The ones that really did not want to go back into the office and believe that their performance had improved at home were millennials. Okay, now let's think about that. Why would that be the case? It's because they've grown up electronically. Okay, they've developed their friends electronically. They play games electronically. That's how they've had that's why they call it social media. So they're completely comfortable with this world. And so for them to work at home in front of a computer, by the way, they've been sitting in front of a computer most of their life anyway, at school and at home. They don't want to go back to the office. And of course, their performance didn't decline. The group that most wanted to get back into the office and felt that their performance had declined was Generation X. Okay? Because people the age of Generation X are in their prime earning years. They're in their prime promotion years. Okay? And you don't get those raises and you don't get those promotions unless you built relationships. And those relationships require networks, and those networks require trust. And so that was the group that really wanted to be back there. So I think it's a tough question, Mark, how you deal with young people when they don't really want to be dealt with. Just they want to be left
I feel as though they want flexibility and they want to be able to make their own decisions for themselves.
Yeah.
I would argue that a lot of them may be living with roommates, or they may not have dedicated office space, or they do want to start building that network as soon as they start their career. So hopefully FaceTime is important to them. But we've heard a lot of people say, I think it was actually Gensler that coined this phrase that the best amenity are our colleagues. So if you show up, right, and you know where I'm going here, and there's nobody there, you're not getting that FaceTime. You're not building that network. You're not getting the advocates that you need to help you with your career progression. That's tough. So I think it comes down, everybody is very, very different.
Yeah.
thinking about so we've actually got a question here, so I'm going to turn to that regarding the recession, the looming recession affecting work from home, return to the office, the hybrid conversation. Do you think that leaders are going to shift their focus away from diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging with the recession? Or do you think
I'm going to let Jessica do that one first.
The flip side, do you think that they will be more focused in on it?
I will say that the people who are dedicated and committed to it will stick to it regardless, is what I'll say. The ones who are looking for an out will use all of those things as an excuse. I don't know any simpler way to put it. All of these, so I will say that one sign of commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is dedicating funds to promote activities, to train staff, to bring in coaches, to in the most progressive organizations to compensate leaders who step up for DEI councils and employee resource groups. So the way that leaders respond in these moments and the ways that they maintain their financial commitment to certain things will be a very big indicator of their level of commitment. I understand there are a lot of things that will shuffle, a lot of priorities that will have to be evaluated or reevaluated. But as I said, the ones who are committed to it will find a way to keep these efforts going. And I will also say DEI is not just a matter of initiatives and projects. It is about embedding values, embedding diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as values in your organization. You don't necessarily need a budget to do that. It is free to show up as an individual differently. It is free to exemplify these values and to encourage those among your staff and your team. It's free to do that. And no other economic factors influence that.
I don't think I could say it much better than Jessica did. One of the things I appreciated the most was she said, hey, the DEI, the initiatives require resources, okay? And whether those resources are money and whether they're time, whatever they happen to be. And what I found in my career is that organizations will commit to management development programs. We really want to take our top young talent and we really want to move them along and bring them up in the organization and get them thinking cross-functionally. And as soon as tough financial times hit, it's the first programs that they cut. So here's supposedly a key value of the organization that they cut and run the second things get tough. And I would be sad to see it happen, but I would not be surprised to see if some of the commitment to these sort of programs eroded as if a recession indeed does come on.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the company's culture and how they prioritize. We have a mentorship program, an internship program, where we recruit students from underrepresented backgrounds to bring them into corporate real estate. It requires a lot of resources, money and time, but we're dedicated to it. But to your point, you need the resources. Dr. Bailey, I've got a question for you. Any data metrics from research on interpersonal conflict in the office? Up or down in the hybrid environment, management having to mediate without employees who don't get along, for example. So let me repeat that, and this is in the chat. Are there any data metrics, way to measure on interpersonal conflicts with the hybrid environment and how management can mediate the employees that have conflicts?
Well, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that. By the way, that's what dissertations are made out of, Mark. So if you would like to get a doctorate and spend the next 6 years of your life working on a question, that'd be great. And maybe you could actually answer that question. Welcome. But I do know that one of the things they say that I have read is an advantage of remote work is it removes office politics. And office politics benefits some more than others. right? Because some are better at playing those politics than others are. And so one of the things it does is it removes that advantage, which might be an unfair advantage because those politics might not have nothing to do with performance. Now, how conflicts are mediated, and whether that is done differently remotely than it is face-to-face, I just don't have the answer to that. I'm going to jot it down. I'm going to take a look, see if there's anything out there. And if not, Mark, I might steal the study from you and do it myself.
Sounds good. You know, I have one employee that I'm very close to that I've worked with for quite a long time that has told me that they don't like coming into the office because of all the gossip that they experience when they come in, and they'd much rather just stay at home and ignore that.
Yeah.
So here's an interesting one from Nadia. She's not sure that she agrees because based on what she's seeing with the clients, employees are tired of having the ability to work from home. We are seeing that the culture has evolved, embracing flexibility and choice, which I agree with you, as a way to improve work-life balance. Agreed. We are seeing this across generations and industries. The question is, do you feel that it's likely that the culture and lifestyle will revert back to fully office-based workplaces?
Jessica?
Well, I will say, I think that the pendulum always swings back and forth. I don't know what factors could go into that, but as time has shown us, there tend to be these phases that we go through as organizations. I don't know that anyone can necessarily predict that. I think it's also like in the course of these conversations, even in a couple points that have been brought up previously, I think it's important for us to be cognizant of the biases that we bring to these kinds of conversations. And I know people ought to like cringe a lot when you say bias, but I'm saying that we need to be aware of how we fold our own experience and our own generational things and stuff into some of our perspectives on these issues. I just wanted to bring that point up because number one, there's always going to be a vast array of opinions about all of these topics, but we have to be conscious about how we bring our own stuff into how we make assessments about these things. Like even the idea that some people are saying, well, everyone's tired of working from home. Not everyone is tired. And the thing is, it's just like any survey too. If you say, okay, are you tired of working from home? 90% say yes, 10% say no. That doesn't mean, all right, let's move forward because 90% are tired. To me, that says, well, let's do some analysis about the 10% who aren't, and also factor that into the larger conversation as well.
James, any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think that we're ever going to revert all the way back to a full office community and culture. I just think that cat's out of the bag. And now it becomes what is the proper hybrid models, which we were talking about earlier, which there's all sorts of challenges in terms of setting up, especially in terms of the equity and the equality issues that go with different kinds of employees within the same organization or different kinds of jobs. If you work construction, you can't do it remote. So there's a lot we're going to have to iron out here, but I don't think we're ever going to return to it. And I think we appreciate the work-life family balance issues. We appreciate the control issues that come along with it. Those are very generational values as well. The 70-year-old person might, want to get up and put that suit on every day and get in the car and doesn't mind having to do that. Versus a 25-year-old, very, very different conversation in terms of the values they bring to it. So no, the cat's out of the bag. We're never going back. It's a matter of how far we go back. I think Jessica's right. It's a pendulum, and it's going to swing back toward an office culture. How far, I don't know, but it's certainly not going to swing all the way back like it was in 2019.
Yeah, there's so many factors influencing it. That makes sense. It seems that, people are concerned regarding commutes, their commute time, right? Nobody wants to sit in their car for a long time, especially if more people come back, the congestion will just get worse. It sounds like one shoe does not fit all, and I think we are aware of that. Flexibility is obviously something that we all want, and we want to be able to make those decisions ourselves, and really being thoughtful. As August has asked, can you share an example of effective use of hybrid environment that builds community that includes everybody? So how with a hybrid workforce are you going to build that community? It's difficult.
Sorry. It looks like you're about to speak. James. Go ahead.
No, I was waiting for you.
Have at it.
You had some points earlier, about just the contact and taking the time to do social things, and to touch base and to have one meeting a week that's just about, sharing things, to encourage people to have impromptu conversations, to not necessarily, and in the way we do in the hallway. I think that some of it might sound common sense. I'm just not so sure how easy it is to do. Jessica, do you have thought? What are your pickups on that?
I think you made a great point about the social component of things. When we first started talking about these kind of incremental returns to the office, one of the things that I know we were advising clients about was, how are you going to make use of the time where everyone is there, when everyone is actually together? And I think that carving out some space in that time for more social interaction, and not just, okay, we're all coming in for a meeting, we're all coming in to work, it's a heads down day on this project, that you do carve out some space for, when you're actually together, to get to know each other. I think that that's critical. And I've seen, a lot of organizations where there are some staff that are remote and some that are more locally, co-located, that they do have policies and agreements that people who do work remotely will commit to come to the office once or twice a year, or for certain team activities and things like that. So I think that there are some measures in place that we have, that organizations have been doing in the past. Maybe we just have to do more of that. But there definitely has to be some accountability and ownership of making that happen somewhere along the way.
I think,
and that needs to be consistent.
I think the employee needs to want to be a part of the community as well.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, right? They need to put their best foot forward. They need to put effort into this as well. It's interesting, when the pandemic first started, we started scheduling coffee hours or happy hours. It almost felt like added work. And maybe it was because we were going from one call to another and just had a really busy schedule. And here was another Zoom call, which can be exhausting. Whereas coming into the office and those casual discussions, those, the programs, the business or employee resource groups, or different types of programs you can get involved in by choice, was not work. It was actually fun and a way to build that community.
Mm-hmm. And actually, Mark, I think it's also important to think of this as part of the bigger picture. So it's not just like we were talking earlier about, it's not just about asking the question, it's about creating the space where people feel like their answer is valued. Even in the day-to-day interaction where people feel seen, they are more likely to want to be part of these intentionally created activities. So it is when, you log on to a Zoom call and it's those little, that little social time before you get started. Who do you acknowledge on the Zoom? Who do you say hi to? Who do you ask how they're doing? Who do you, even in a virtual environment, in a meeting, who do you give the floor to ask, what's your opinion on this? And then what do you do with that feedback? So it's a lot about the day-to-day behaviors that create that willingness and that feeling of belonging that make people want to go that extra step to say, okay, I'll show up for the happy hour. I will get dressed at the end of my workday to come out to see everybody just because I haven't seen them in a month. They will do that because in the grand scheme of their day-to-day existence, they feel like this is something that's worthwhile to them.
And I think being in person, you are more aware of social cues. If the employees are engaged, if they are happy, or do they have anxiety? Do they feel that they're not part of the team? Are you risking losing them? And as a manager, you know, the onus is on you to be able to manage your team and ensure that they are highly productive, but also feel as though they are part of that community. And if you don't see those social cues, if you're not, you know, adept at measuring or looking for them, that could pose a lot of challenges. So I'm looking here, we've got any other questions? And I think that we have actually covered most of them. I hope that, and if there are any closing comments that either one of you have, or if there are any other questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. But I think that this has been very beneficial. This is going to be evolving over time. And I guess that's one question that I have, probably more for you, James. But as we gather data, I assume that you are seeing a lot of different companies out there that are working on gathering data, because today we lack a lot of that. That is going to help us. So, you know, in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years, we'll be able to look at data to help us really better measure, to Karen's question earlier, have KPIs, some dashboards, ways to measure productivity, you know, employee engagement, that will help us with managing a more successful workforce. Any thoughts on that?
Pretty much exactly what you said is I think there's a lot of people that are in favor of remote work or hybrid work. And so they make a lot of claims about it that we can't claim. We just don't know. The data is not there. We don't have best practice yet. And so you can't say that, for example, I've heard a lot of people say performance is higher when you work from home. That is frankly just not true. And yet people still say it. And so I think that we've got a lot of advocacy going on here, people saying what they want to believe and what they want to hear, but it's going to be a while until we you know, all the dust settles, this plays out, and we figure out what, you know, best practice is. So you're exactly right, Mark. We just don't know.
Okay, well, that's great. I want to welcome Teresa back. I want to thank the two of you for joining us today. This was incredibly informative, and I know that I'm anxious to continue to learn more and see how it will help me. Teresa, I'm going to hand it back to you. Thanks again for having us today.
Well, I thank you all. This has been an incredible, incredible conversation. I think, you know, what I realize is that we don't know at the end of the day. And I want to thank James, Jessica, and Mark for moderating, and thank everybody for joining us. I think the conversation is an important conversation, and it's going to continue to evolve. I would encourage everyone to read up on what Dr. Bailey and Jessica have written. I think they both have incredibly thoughtful insights into the subject matter we discussed today. Again, I know your time is valuable. We at Cornet and the education team really appreciate everybody joining, and I really appreciate our panelists for giving us such a thoughtful conversation. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.